Hi and welcome back to Pick Up the Pieces. We're in the Pick Up kitchen today and my husband is going to show me and us how he makes his homemade spaghetti sauce, I guess we call it, and we're going to make lasagna with this sauce today. So we're making a double batch, which is twice the amount that we typically make. However, because we're making two lasagnas, and I'll explain why in a little bit, why we're making two, it just makes sense to do a huge batch of sauce. So we're starting off with already chopped up onions and garlic, and we've just got a little bit of olive oil in this pan heated up, and we're going to add our chopped up onions and garlic right to the pot and get that going. And I'm just going to take a wooden spoon here and give that a stir so we don't burn anything. Okay, and while we've got that going, we're going to get the rest of the ingredients prepped to go in the sauce. So we use a big can, 106-ounce can of San Marzano tomatoes. We find San Marzano tomatoes are a lot tastier than like traditional tomatoes that are not San Marzano. Okay, and then over here we have our tomato paste. We've got garlic powder, some oregano, parsley, basil, bay leaves, some canned or jarred mushrooms, and sugar. The butter is not going in the sauce. And then I just want to give you a view here of our onions and garlic. This is a huge pot, but it will come in handy to make the sauce. So we're just taking the peeled San Marzano tomatoes, we're going to put them in the blender and we're going to blend them up a little bit. We don't want them to be completely smooth for the sauce, but putting in whole peeled tomatoes like this isn't going to work for the consistency that we want later. So we've got a huge jar. We're just going to, put it in the blender container and blend it up and then get it in the pot when we're ready to do that step. So we've got one blender full blended up. We're just going to do the second one. And as soon as these onions and garlic bits are sauteed nicely, then we'll start adding the rest of the stuff to the pot. And then we like our sauce to simmer for maybe 3-4 hours before we actually use it. We'll taste it along the way, add additional seasonings if we need to. Okay, so now we've got our onions and garlic kind of sauteed a bit and they're tender, and we're going to start adding seasonings. So garlic powder, and I feel like when we do this, we don't really specifically measure. You just sort of like gently cover the surface of the items in the pot with the thing that you're putting in there. And so it's sort of a sprinkle across the top, and it's a terrible measurement, but that's just what ends up working. So that was dried parsley. We've got bay leaves to put in. We're going to put in, how many? 4. 4 bay leaves. Here's some oregano. Again, just kind of sprinkle over the top. I think we use a little bit less oregano than we would parsley, because once you put in a lot of oregano, it's really hard to get it out. But parsley isn't going to do anything bad to your sauce. And then basil. If you have fresh basil, you can absolutely use that here, but we make this sauce year-round, and a lot of times when we make it, we don't have fresh basil, so it is nice to use the dried so that you know you're always going to get good sauce. We're going to use a jar of mushrooms, and so we're dumping those in. And that was a 6-ounce jar of sliced mushrooms. We're just going to give that a stir. Okay, we're going to add a little bit of fresh cracked pepper. And some salt. And again, it's probably just maybe a teaspoon of salt. And then a sprinkling of pepper across the top. All right, so now we're going to add a little bit of our tomatoes. And we're going to get some of our tomato paste in the pan. And we're going to mix the tomato paste in with the veggies and the San Marzano tomatoes, because if you just put big globs of tomato paste in your pot when you've got all your tomatoes in, then you're gonna be fighting to get those big globs of tomato paste dissolved or mixed in. So it is better to put a little bit of your tomatoes in, get your tomato paste in, and kind of mix it through, and then add the rest of your tomatoes. And this is 2 of the large cans of tomato paste. They are 12 ounces each, so 24 ounces total of tomato paste. So then we'll just kind of stir that in a little bit and then add the rest of the tomatoes. That looks pretty good. Looks pretty good, honey. All right, so we're going to add the rest of the tomatoes, right? And that's our 106-ounce can of the San Marzanos that we just kind of pureed up a little bit. And I'm sorry if you hear our dog barking in the background. She likes to do this thing where she goes upstairs and sits in one of our bedrooms and then randomly just barks all day at everything outside. And so there's really no way to avoid the fact that we have a dog and that she's going to bark in the background sometimes. But just know that Miss Ellie is saying hello to you. So we're getting our tomatoes in. And we'll give this a stir. And then are we just kind of leave it on low, let it simmer, and yep, let it simmer for a couple hours. We'll come back, check it for seasoning if we feel like we want to add a little more oregano or a little more basil or something. And later on, if it's too acidic, we can add a little bit of sugar to balance that out. But this is the beginning of our sauce, and we will show you what it looks like later on when it starts to simmer and reduce, and we'll show you what it looks like in a bit.
If you don't do that, you get all kinds of problems.
So here is our sauce. It has simmered for a couple hours. Looks great. And now we're going to make some lasagna. All right, so our spaghetti sauce is done, it's ready, and now we're going to make lasagna. So this recipe is something I have been making probably for 20 years. And it's a Tyler Florence recipe from the Food Network website. It's not something that I invented, but for me, I find if I find a really good recipe and I love it, and every time I make it, it comes out great, I stick with it. I don't go looking for like a new recipe. I just stick with what I know works and what I know we like. So this is our go-to lasagna recipe. So I'm actually making 2 lasagnas. The thing is, if you're gonna make one, it really doesn't take that much time or effort more to make a second one. And one of our kids asked for lasagna, and so rather than just having him over and giving him some of our lasagna, we thought we would just make him his own lasagna. So we're gonna make 2 whole lasagnas tonight, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So first we're going to get the water boiling, which I've already gotten started. We need to boil 2 pounds of lasagna noodles. Now you can use the no boil noodles if you want to. You can make your own fresh pasta if you want to. However, I find if you use the regular lasagna noodles and you just boil them a little bit so that they're flexible, then they will cook the rest of the way in the oven when you bake the lasagna. So we're going to get those cooking. And so I've got water boiling for that, and I'm going to get my colander out. So all I did was go to the store and just get 2 1-pound boxes of lasagna. 1 box will be for one lasagna and 1 box will be for the other. And our water is boiling, so I'm going to get these going. And I will generally boil about half the box at a time so that they don't all get stuck to each other. So I feel like half the box is probably like 10 or 11 of the pasta sheets. So I'm going to get those going, and then when those are softened and I can pull them out, then I'll pull them out, put them in the colander. I won't dump the water. I'll just pull them out, put them in the colander, and then get the next batch of noodles going in that same water. In the meantime, we've got to saute up our onions and garlic and basil with our ground beef and sausage. This recipe calls for ground beef and ground Italian sausage, and this is how I've always made it, and we love it. So I'm going to turn on both of my pans here. And the thing is, when you're cooking lasagna, it's no different really to do a second pan than it is to just do one. So it's not really that much extra effort to make a second one. So I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil to my pans here. I didn't really measure it. I think it's just a couple of good twirls around. The recipe says to use just olive oil. It doesn't even give an amount. So whatever amount kind of slightly coats the bottom of your pan is perfectly fine. So I'm going to make sure that my noodles are here in the pot boiling away. I just don't want them to stick to each other. And I'm not going to cook these completely all the way through. I just want them to be pliable, because when we build lasagna, we need to be able to work with the lasagna and get it in the right position. So for one lasagna, I'm going to use 1 onion and 2 cloves of garlic. And then for the other one, another onion and 2 cloves of garlic. And then I've got some of my frozen basil here. So it's fresh basil from my garden that I froze with a little olive oil, and I'm going to use that. So we're just going to chop up the ingredients for one lasagna and then get it in the pan and then repeat that. And this Müeller chopper is great. For tonight, I'm using the fine chop setting. I guess it's like fine dice as opposed to large dice. And if you're chopping up some fresh garlic using this, you could just chop your garlic right with the same chopper that you're doing the onions in. If I'm using the large dice setting on this chopper, then I will use my separate garlic chopper. But tonight, everything is going to get diced to be like the same consistency. So I'm just going to use the chopper for that. So this will go into one of the pans. Now, I prefer to do 2 separate pans for this, because then I don't have to try to guess when I'm done with this when I'm done sauteing everything and cooking everything, I don't have to try to perfectly separate my one pan's worth of stuff into 2 pans for lasagna. It's so much easier just to do it in 2 separate pots. That way you know this one is for this lasagna, this one's for this lasagna, and it's just easier. And then I'm just making my garlic. These are really big cloves of garlic, so I'm just making them a little smaller for when I put them through the chopper so that I get even slices on everything. And then this is for my second pan. And of course, I'm already splashing oil all over myself, so, you know, whatever. All right, so I put my basil in there. So the instructions do say to add salt and pepper at some point. I will do that now. When you are adding your seasonings, like your oregano, your bay leaves, your parsley, your basil, you want to add them to your pan when you've got a little bit of oil in the pan, so you kind of wake them up. Fresh herbs are obviously wonderful, but like we can't always get them all year round. But even just your salt and pepper, you kind of like wake up the flavor of it if you put it in when your pan is hot and you're sauteing things. Versus if you just add it at the end, I feel like you don't get as good a flavor on it. So just a couple of grinds of pepper. And a nice pinch of salt in each pan. So the fresh basil's like melting in with the onions. We've got the salt and pepper, which is great. We're seasoning as we go and building layers of flavor. And now I think I can take these pasta sheets out. Yeah, they're pretty pliable, and that's what you want. You don't need your pasta all the way cooked through. Like I said, it's going to bake in the oven for almost an hour. So you want to get it out when it's pliable. So now I'll just put the rest of this box of pasta in the pan. And that's going to be the pasta for our first lasagna. That'll sort of wilt down into the pot, and as it does, I'll kind of give it a little bit of a stir or adjust it a little with the tongs so they don't stick together. So while we're waiting now for our onions and our pasta to cook, we're going to get our ricotta mixture all set up. So again, I'm making 2 lasagnas, so what I'm going to do is add 2 eggs to my bowl. And I'm going to do this a second time. And I've got 4 containers of ricotta cheese. I'm using the whole milk. I feel like you can use part skim if you'd like to cut back on the fat in your dish, but whole milk tastes the best. These are 15-ounce containers. You need 30 ounces of ricotta for each recipe. And so that's 15 and 30 for that batch of ricotta, and then another 15 over here, and then another 15 ounces here, so that'll be another 30 ounces total. So it was a total of 60 ounces of ricotta for 2 recipes. Okay, now my instructions say to add some seasoning to the ricotta. I'm just going to check our onions. These are looking good. And you want these to cook down a little bit, get translucent, but you don't want any color on them. So if you are starting to see that you're getting color on your onions, then turn your heat down a little bit. That is looking good. And then I'm going to get these lasagna noodles in the pot. And what I'm also going to do is just add a little bit of olive oil to the lasagna noodles that I pulled out of the boiling water so they don't stick together. Okay, so we've got our ricotta, and I will add a little salt and pepper. The recipe also calls for some parsley. This is just some dried parsley. And I'm going to put a small palmful in, probably about a tablespoon. And also some oregano goes in the ricotta mixture, so about a teaspoon is about what I use. And that goes in your ricotta mixture. And then all we have to do is mix that up. Without making a mess, theoretically. And then once this ricotta mixture is all combined and the eggs are all combined in there, we're going to set it aside and we will use it when we assemble our lasagnas. Okay, see, so there it's all completely combined. So that is one. Here's another one. And you just want to get that egg evenly mixed in so you don't end up with like lumps of egg in your ricotta cheese. Okay, so that is the second one. And now that our onions are nicely sauteed, yep, we're good. Now we're going to add the meat in. So we are going to add a pound of ground beef into each pan. So 1 pound, 1 pound. We're also going to add a pound of sausage. And I'm just using mild Italian sausage. Into each pan as well. And we're going to brown up all that meat. I have this really fun tool, and it's sort of like just this ground beef, I don't know, it's like a meat masher, I guess you call it. And I absolutely love this. It comes in so handy whenever you're making something in a pan where you're using ground beef and you kind of want to chop it all up. This makes it so easy to do. So I'll show you. So it basically helps you to break up your ground meat, your ground sausage, but it's easier than using like, you know, a wooden spoon or something like that. You don't have to like break it up by hand before you put it in the pot. You can just use this masher and it does all the work for you. So I'll show you that again. And while we're over here, We're going to check these noodles. So we're going to get those noodles out. And all I did, like I said, was put these in the colander with a little oil on them so they don't stick together. And so these ones are going to go in the colander too. You don't need to rinse your lasagna sheets with any water or anything. They are not fully cooked all the way through, so just sitting there in the colander, they're not going to overcook much. They're going to be fine. So just a little oil so that they don't stick to each other, and then assembly will be easier. So I'm going to get the next batch of noodles in, and then go back to my meat. Now, the nice thing about having two separate pans is, as you can see, the pans are not over full. So we're cooking all of these onions and seasonings and meat. If I tried to cook all of this in one pan, it would be a mess, and I would probably be getting it all over the stove. So it's much easier to do it in two separate pans. That way you know you have the ingredients for one lasagna in one pan and then the ingredients for the other in the other pan. And they don't get mixed together and you don't make as big of a mess. So let me double check my instructions. So it says cook your pasta, saute your onions. All right, so when the meat is cooked, I'll be adding some tomato paste in. So let me get my tomato paste. So I've got 2 6-ounce cans of tomato paste. And I'm just going to get these open and ready. So that way when my meat is fully cooked, then we are ready to go and we can just mix this right in and then let the meat mixture cool a tiny bit. And then we can go right to assembling our lasagna. This lasagna cooks in the oven for about an hour. And then you do want to let it rest for about a half hour before you serve it. The thing I love about this lasagna is that your pieces stay together. I don't know if you've ever made a lasagna where you go to cut it into pretty squares and you go to serve it and then it just puddles all out onto your plate. It's a super frustrating thing to experience, especially if you've taken the time to like layer your ingredients and everything. And so if you assemble the lasagna in the way that Tyler Florence tells you to, it will always come out great. And when you cut it and go to serve it, it will always stay stacked up perfectly, like just magazine perfect lasagna. So it's a great recipe. Like I said, I've been using it forever and I will continue to use it forever. All right, so just breaking up the meat a little bit more. And just kind of mixing it around so it's getting cooked on all sides. And basically you just want to get your ground beef and your ground sausage completely cooked all the way through so that you don't see any red or pink still. And as long as you are able to get that all the way cooked through in the pan, then you bake it in the oven. It'll be fully cooked certainly after an hour in the oven, but you don't want to be putting raw meat in the lasagna when you're making your layers. And that chopping tool comes in really handy because, like I said, it breaks up your meat really well and allows it to cook more evenly, and it's just easier to do than using any other kind of utensil to do it. And this one here, the front pan, or the pan closest to me, seems to be cooking a little faster than the one in the back. So I'm just going to make sure this is all broken up and continues to cook. So I'm just going to move my first batch of lasagna sheets into this bowl, get them out of the colander, and so now I can put my other batch in there. And now the last batch of lasagna sheets will go in the pot, and then those will be ready when we need them to assemble. So this does come together pretty quickly. Now, if you don't want to make homemade sauce when you make your lasagna and you just want to use a couple jars of store-bought sauce, that is perfectly fine. I absolutely love my husband's pasta sauce. I'm not a huge red sauce person. I kind of prefer like a cream sauce over red sauce in most circumstances, but my husband makes amazing red sauce. And so whenever we have lasagna, usually he'll make a batch because it's just so good, and then we'll use a majority of it in our lasagna recipe, but then if there's leftovers, we'll put it in quart-sized containers in the freezer, and then we'll use it for other meals as well, like if we just want some spaghetti and meatballs or something like that. So this pan of meat is ready to go. It's just going to add my tomato paste and get that sort of mixed through. And you want that tomato paste evenly distributed through your meat mixture. Now, if you have really high fat content ground beef, or you have a very fatty sausage that you're using, you may want to drain out any excess fat that accumulates in the pan. We have very little fat in the bottom of this pan. The ground beef that we get from a local butcher, and it's very good quality. So, and the sausage really doesn't seem to have a tremendous amount of fat in it, so I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to drain that out. But if you find when you're cooking this that you've got a lot of juices in the bottom of the pan, you've got a lot of fat in the bottom of the pan, then you are going to want to skim it out or pour it off. Okay, so that pan of meat is done. And the recipe does call for a couple of bay leaves, and I'm just realizing I didn't add them in earlier. That is fine. I'm just going to do it now. And I'm going to let that sit. The flavor from the bay leaf will soak in as it sits and as the sauce cools, and it will be just fine. We also had bay leaf in our pasta sauce, so I'm sure that the flavor will be just fine. So this one is all set. And now we're going to get this one all taken care of, and I'm just going to make sure my pasta sheets are in the water. So that is almost done. There's just a little bit of pink left in the meat. So I'm going to wait till all the pink is gone, and then I'll put the tomato paste in this one, and then I'll pull this one off the heat as well to let it cool. When you assemble your lasagnas, it's completely fine if your ingredients are warm, but you don't want them to be hot. We're going to be layering sauce and the pasta sheets and meat and cheese, and you just don't want anything to be super scalding hot because you don't want it to start melting anything while you're assembling. All right, so those pasta sheets could use maybe another moment or two. My pasta sheets over here, I'm just putting a little olive oil on them. And that is fine. And so we will be ready to assemble very soon. We're just waiting for this to be completely cooked. Now this lasagna recipe, you can actually make it the day before you plan to eat it. So if you're going to have a whole bunch of people over for dinner tomorrow and you don't want to do a ton of cooking tomorrow, you assemble your lasagna, put it in your fridge overnight, let it sit, And then before your guests come the next day, then you can cook it. So this is also a good make-ahead meal if you're having company. So I'm going to put in my tomato paste now to my second pot of meat. And I'm just going to mix that tomato paste around so it gets evenly distributed. And I can turn the heat off of my pasta as well. I'm going to get these last couple of lasagna sheets out of here because they are good. They're nice and soft and pliable. Not fully cooked through, but that is not, that's all we want. We just want them to be pliable and bendable so that we can build our lasagnas. Got my tomato paste completely mixed through. It's even. And we're just going to let this sit. I'll fish the bay leaves out right before we go to assemble our lasagna. But right now, I'm just going to leave that there and let it start to cool a little bit. And then when we are ready to assemble, I will show you exactly the steps that you need for a perfect lasagna. Okay, so we are ready to assemble our lasagna. Now, this lasagna we are going to cook and have for dinner tonight. This lasagna is going to go to our son's house, and so we're just going to assemble this tonight. He's going to bake it tomorrow. So I will show you what it looks like to assemble. I'm going to make sure his pan is coated nicely with cooking spray so nothing sticks. This is a stoneware pan. I feel like technically I probably don't have to spray it, but I do generally. So now with Tyler's recipe, he tells you exactly how to layer everything. And if you follow instructions and you layer it the way he says, your lasagna will be perfect. So first you're going to put some sauce on the bottom of your baking dish. So our homemade sauce, I'm going to do probably like 2 ladles worth. And then all I'm going to do is sort of move it all around. Now the secret to good lasagna is you don't want to do too much sauce. If you do too much sauce, that might be a reason why your lasagna falls apart when you go to cut it. You can always serve extra sauce on the side, and people can always top their lasagna with more sauce. But you don't want to put too much sauce in any of the steps when you're assembling, because if you do, you may cause your lasagna to slip apart when you go to serve it. Okay, so after you put your ladle of sauce, you're going to do 4 noodles on the bottom. So I'm going to do 4 on the bottom of their pan. And it's okay if you have like a broken noodle, you can just put that along a side or something, that's completely fine. And then I'm going to do 4 on ours. Now another trick is I alternate the direction I'm going with the pasta each time. So with this one, I'm going this way, so the next time I'll go this way. And with this one, I'm going this way, so the next time I will try to go the other direction. So it looks like this one's going to need 5 because it's a slightly different size pan, but that is fine. The other thing the recipe says to do is to make sort of a collar with the lasagna. So you're going to line the pan edges, like here, with noodles. And I know it sounds really strange to do this, but when you do this, again, it helps you for the pasta to stay, or it helps for your lasagna to stay together when you go to cut it. If you have pasta lining all the way around. You basically make like a collar of noodles going all the way around. So it's sort of, in a way, it's almost like a bowl of noodle, right? So that's like your edges, that's your bottom. But if you do that, then your lasagna will stay together when you slice it. So I'm going to do that with their pan as well. And again, it's just making like a collar of noodles. And this crispy noodle edge is probably one of the most delicious bites of this lasagna. Trust me on that. Okay, so after you've done your layer of sauce and your layer of noodles with your noodle collar, then you're going to put half of the meat in. So this is meat for them. So I'm going to eyeball about half of the pan, and I'm just going to get it in their lasagna. Okay, and then just going to spread this out, and it will help to keep your noodle collar sort of in place as well if you get your meat in. Okay, and then same thing with ours. I'm going to get about half of the pan's worth of meat. And I'm just going to spread this out so it makes a nice flat layer. And like I said, it's going to keep your noodles from moving around, and it is going to keep your collar in place. Now, if you find that you've got some little gaps where there isn't any meat, you can just grab a little bit more. It's completely fine because you're going to have 2 layers of cheese and 2 layers of meat. And trust me, these pans will be full when this lasagna is fully assembled. All right, so that looks pretty good. So now the recipe says to put half of the ricotta in each one. So again, with our ricotta mixture, we're going to take approximately half of it, kind of dollop it. And you're just going to want to kind of frost your meat layer here with this layer of ricotta. So half the meat with half the ricotta. Okay. And then the other lasagna, approximately half. And as you continue to assemble, all of your noodles will stay in place. And like I said, when you go to slice this later, it will slice perfectly. And you want to get it all the way to the edge because you want every bite of lasagna to be uniform. All right, I'm just tucking my noodle collar back in. Okay, so after you do your layer of sauce, then pasta, then meat, then ricotta mixture, then you put mozzarella cheese. So we have a huge bag here, mozzarella cheese that we got from Restaurant Depot. You use about 1 pound of cheese per lasagna, so you could certainly use less if you're trying to be a little more health conscious, but and you certainly don't want to go crazy and use like 3 times the amount of cheese, but you gotta put cheese in your lasagna. So I'm just looking for like a nice even layer of the mozzarella. Again, it helps it all stay together, so when you go to cut it, then it doesn't fall apart. Okay, so now for our other lasagna. And if your little noodle collars are falling down on you, that is okay. Just lift them up as you continue to build this lasagna, they will stay in place. Okay, so that looks good for the mozzarella on each one. And I also take a little bit of Romano cheese, give a little sprinkle of that on top of my mozzarella. And then you repeat your layers again. So now we're gonna do another layer of sauce. So right on top of your cheese and everything. And here is where I tend to carefully distribute because I don't really want to disturb all my layers. So I'm going to sort of dollop my sauce on in a more careful manner so that when I spread it, I'm not disturbing all of my layers that I've worked so hard on underneath. So I'm just going to grab a clean spatula and I'm going to spread this layer of sauce to cover my layer of mozzarella. And I would say this layer of sauce was probably about a ladle and a half. There. And then same thing on this lasagna. So see, making 2 lasagnas at one time doesn't take that much longer than making 1. So you can wrap your lasagna or put your lasagna in a foil pan or a metal pan. You can put it in your freezer. I would just wrap it really well with foil and then with a layer of saran on top of that. And then when you go to bake it, you can bake it either from frozen or you can let it thaw. Just take your saran off and then you've got an amazing meal ready to go. It also really travels well. So if you're going somewhere and you're going to be a guest, you could bring a lasagna and cook it at their house, or you could bring it already cooked. And if you know anybody that's recently had a baby or something like that, this is a really great thing to give to them as a gift so that they don't have to cook one night. So layer of tomato sauce. Now we do another layer of pasta. So like I said, I'm going to kind of alternate my layers so that, again, like structurally, my lasagna stays together. And it's okay if there's a little extra noodle here on the side. Like I said, that bit of pasta on the side is really tasty. It almost gets a little crunchy. So now I had done this one the other way, so now I'm going this way. And I might be going the wrong direction on this one, but it doesn't matter, it's fine. Even if I forgot to alternate my noodles, it will be just fine. So pasta, now the other half of the meat. So the rest of the meat goes in this one, meat goes in this one. And I might have 2 pans to clean, but I don't mind because I know that I have the meat distributed properly between the 2 lasagnas and they're not going to end up being like lopsided or uneven or whatever. And the combination of Italian sausage and ground beef is so good. I really hope that you do try this. Let me know if you like it. I've been making this lasagna, like I said, for probably 20 years, and it is amazing. We love it. The flavor is so good, and leftovers are even better. All right, so that's pretty well evenly situated. And now you just use the last of your ricotta. And it's okay if one of your layers of ricotta is slightly thicker than the other. I think I do an okay job of eyeballing half of it, but it does not matter. It'll be just fine if you've got a little bit extra cheese mixture here and then your lower layer was like less cheesy. It does not matter. It won't make a difference. You're not going to mess it up. And see, even though it's only 2 layers of meat and 2 layers of cheese, see, this pan is pretty full. It's a very generous lasagna. I would say this cuts into probably 20 pieces, just depending on how big of an eater you are, or you know, how big of a piece of lasagna your family likes when they're served. Okay, and so that's the rest. Oop, found a bay leaf. So that's the rest of the ricotta for this lasagna. And again, just spreading it to the sides with my spatula. And you really do want like a deep baking dish when you make this. You want to invest in a lasagna pan for this recipe for sure. Okay, so I've got my last layer of the ricotta. Now we do more mozzarella. Okay, and I'm just making sure my layer of cheese is even. You don't want to, you know, so completely covered in cheese that that's all you taste. I just like a nice even layer of cheese. But really, each lasagna should use a pound of cheese. And I'm just breaking apart some of this cheese like it's a little bit clumpy, which is completely fine, I don't mind, but I just don't want huge clumps of cheese in an area where like right next to it the bite had like no cheese. I'm just trying to kind of evenly distribute. All right, so that's all set, and now I'm just going to do another sprinkle of the Romano cheese. And then we're going to do more sauce. Okay, I'm just going to take my spatula again and evenly cover my cheese layer with the sauce. If you need like a little bit more sauce, you can just grab a little more, just so that there's a nice even layer. And see, you can see like this whole noodle collar situation worked out just fine because it's basically supporting the lasagna. And like I said, when you go to cut it later, it will not fall apart. Okay, so layer of sauce, and then top with noodles. So the last layer of your pasta, so now you're just going to use up whatever lasagna noodles you have left, and do your best to just cover the top completely. I'll kind of alternate this last layer. And then if you need to, you can sort of break up a noodle here. So if you have like a slightly bare edge, then just rip up some of your noodles. And that will be just fine. And then I've got to repeat that with this one. You know what? This one seems to have less noodles, so that is fine. I will maybe borrow one from this one. It will be just fine. And I think what I'm going to do, because this pan has more than enough noodles, I'm going to borrow a sheet from there. Okay, good enough. So that is covered, and we're out of pasta noodles. We've used up our ricotta, we've used up our meat mixture, and now all we have to do is add a little bit more sauce to the top of our pasta and a little bit more cheese, and then this one is going to get wrapped up and put in the fridge for one of our kids to pick up tomorrow, and then this one is going to go in the oven to cook for us for tonight's dinner. So last layer of sauce here. Now when I bake this lasagna, I will bake it on a baking sheet. Sometimes it'll bubble over a little bit because it's really full, as you can see, so you don't want to mess around and just put this in your oven and then make a mess. So you're definitely going to want to put this like on a baking sheet so that if it does bubble over a little bit, then you're not cleaning up a disaster. All right, so a little bit more cheese now. You want that crusty, cheesy layer on the top. It's delicious. And then same thing on the other one, just add your final layer of cheese. And when you bake this, you bake it uncovered. You do not want to put a sheet of foil on top of this. Go to bake it, and then when you pull it out of the oven and pull your foil off, you're going to pull off all your cheese. So this does get cooked in the oven. It does not get covered. And the cheese will get all melty. All the layers will heat up. And like I said, just a little, when I do the mozzarella, I always do a little bit of Romano as well. So we'll add that. And there we have it. So we have 2 lasagnas. Like I said, this one is going in the oven right now, and then this one will be picked up tomorrow by one of our kids, and they will bake it at their house and enjoy it when they decide to make it. So, all right, I will be back in a little bit, and I'll show you what this lasagna looks like when it is fully cooked. Okay, so here is our lasagna. Came out of the oven. It cooked at 350 for exactly 1 hour. And it's very bubbly. Cheese is perfectly melted. And then that is the lasagna for our kids to pick up tomorrow that they are going to cook at their house. And I was just letting it cool before I put it in our fridge for them. And there we go. All right, so dinner is ready, and so I am just going to show you how we cut up this lasagna now. It is huge, and you are really going to need a serrated knife to get through this lasagna to cut it properly. Also, your little noodle skirt or whatever you want to call it around the edges here, like your noodle collar, you may need to kind of cut with scissors to be able to get through it more easily, because see, these little edges get a little crispy and they're really tasty. So I just kind of make a little snip, and then, so this cooked in the oven for an hour, and then I've been letting it sit on the counter for about 30 minutes. You do want to let it cool. It is easier to cut and serve if it is a little bit cool. Trust me, the center of it will still be piping hot, but if you try to get it out of the pot or get it out of the pan right when you pull it out of the oven, it will definitely be a challenge. So now I'm just gonna kind of rotate here and then do the same thing on the other side. So I'm gonna kind of make some cuts in the noodle collar so that it's easier to cut through. And then with, again, a serrated knife, I'll cut this into squares. And then one last cut. And then I will get a piece out and show you what it looks like. So I use sort of a smaller spatula to do this, because if you try to use a spatula that is wider than your piece of lasagna, you're going to make a mess. So the first piece may or may not come out pretty, but that is okay. There we go. We've got a piece of lasagna. And here it is. And we are serving this with garlic bread tonight. You could also make a salad to go with it. I'm just gonna take a bite. This lasagna comes out perfect every time. The mixture of the ground beef with the sausage is amazing. And that ricotta cheese makes nice kind of contrast between the layers of the pasta. I definitely think if you guys give this a shot, you'll love it. And if you do try it, please mention in the comments what you thought. I really appreciate some feedback and to hear what you thought of it if you do get a chance to try it. I want to say thank you for joining us in the Pickup Kitchen today. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for watching our videos and supporting us. It means a whole lot to us. And if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. Have a great night.